We are live. Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have McLaughlin. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on. I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and I know you post a lot of good information on there around conditioning or endurance exercise. And I think it'll be perfect to bring you on the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast, even though it's geared towards combat sports. But I'd like to bring on a lot of different coaches from different areas here. We've had many debates on here around, I guess, various conditioning modalities. A lot of people fall into the idea of performing low intensity conditioning to build that base, higher intensity to almost peak. We've had recently Andrew Usher on and Dr. John Babray talking about a pure high intensity training approach, which was very interesting. I quite enjoy I guess, going against the grain of what we have here. So it would be perfect to have you on to talk low intensity training.
Sure.
Maybe provide a brief background about yourself, Mark, and just so listeners can understand where you come from.
Yeah. So I started in the performance field back in 1997. And the reason I got into it was there was a lot of catastrophic injuries in young athletes that I was seeing. Reading about it in the newspaper. Like this one cross-country runner broke a femur in the last 200 meters of a race.
Oh my gosh.
And and all the catastrophic injuries were in track and field. And so growing up in sports and everything, like the worst injury I ever had was a sprained ankle. And so I thought, man, there's got to be a better way for these kids to train and reach their potential. So I just started educating myself. I was, I think, 35, 36 at the time, had a job that actually paid me money, and just started researching, applying to myself. And then I applied it at the high school I went to for 3 years. That was kind of my internship, I guess, for lack of a better term. And then I opened my own training facility in 2003. And that kind of marked the start of the journey with technology, with, aerobic training, with, looking at training more from a biological standpoint, physiological adaptations versus biomechanical and all that. And then fast forward to today where I, work for Lake Oswego School District, where I oversee the training of all the sports within the district from middle school all the way up to high school.
Nice. Perfect. Let's jump straight into our conditioning topic. And I think obviously you mentioned their physiology around the conditioning side. So maybe let's start there. What kind of adaptations are we looking to, I guess, elicit or induce through low intensity conditioning? And maybe we can start there with defining what low intensity conditioning even is.
Yeah. So kind of the way that I look at it and was taught was, what are your principles and, methodologies and, what is your, mission statement for the training, for lack of a better term. And so, with that, like mine is, to develop the, largest bank of biological power for the athlete where they can perform their sport at the highest level, both in practice and in games or matches without, rather fatigue. And so then based off of that, then you need to take, okay, where is the kind of the gold standard from a conditioning standpoint for the sport? What are those markers? Is it, blood lactate? Is it resting heart rate? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to quantify that. So, what are your key indicators on conditioning fitness? And then you need to test the athlete, based on those parameters, and then how that fits into their sport, and then begin to develop a program based off of that. So, with what the population say of fighters, like, okay, how are you testing as an athlete? And what do you need more of? And so then if it's a low conditioning, low level conditioning, okay, then we need to establish, what that means to you. So are you using heart rate? Are you using percentage of max heart rate? Are you using say SMO2, to monitor, oxygen levels at the working muscle or whatever. Because I think a lot of people just train blindly. Like, okay, I need a lot of level conditioning. Okay, where are you at? What's the intensity? How long? So
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people will use, well, what's most accessible is just simple heart rate. Oh, I think we may have lost Mark there. Okay. Oh, we got you back.
yep.
We got you back. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so I was just saying that I think most people, out of simplicity and ease of, I guess, accessibility, would use heart rate just because it's quite easy just to slap on a heart rate monitor and kind of just monitor
Mhm.
from there. I think that's where most people find it. So, what would you? Is there a threshold? Because obviously, within, I mean, a lot of people went off Joel Jamison's, I guess, Ultimate MMA Conditioning. That was almost the Bible, I guess, within combat sports, within many other team sports as well, and it was often given just a very simple blank. Okay, 120 to 150 beats per minute. That's considered low intensity. Just don't go above that. Obviously, that differs person to person. All sorts of things, I guess, play into that. So, is there a typical threshold within heart rate that someone could use, or is it a matter of having two tests to see where that is?
No, I think that's a good place to start, just because a lot of people may not have access to, other technology, and heart rate is easy to use and manage. I mean, if you look at the literature from, the best endurance athletes in the world, cross country runners, cyclists, whatever, typically the low level is like anywhere from 45% of max heart rate all the way up to like 72%.
Okay.
And if you look at people that don't have a big base of endurance training, that they should tend to be more towards that lower end, to the point where, walking for some is probably a very good point to start at. Uh, because then you can accumulate a lot of volume at, very low stress levels and begin to build that base. And people also that aren't used to running, say like you have your heavier athlete or whatever, there's no way they're going to be able to stay in that low zone. So then you start drifting out of it, and the adaptation that you're looking for, whether it be from a peripheral standpoint, a cardiac standpoint, autonomic nervous system, you're just not getting it because the heart rates are too high.
Gotcha.
So I always tend easier, like talking right now, like you and I are, that's the pace that you should be going.
Gotcha. And what are these adaptations that I guess you're trying to achieve to this low intensity to essentially transfer to, uh, I guess your competition performance? So you mentioned obviously the central and the peripheral adaptations. What are you trying to achieve specifically with the low intensity?
Yeah, so, there's the heart rate to kind of guide the training. And then, when you work it back to say heart rate variability, from a cardiac system standpoint, like we want a moderate parasympathetic response, meaning, you don't want to be in a fight or flight state with your easy training. So people that I read about on Twitter and other forums, they talk about conditioning as in, okay, run, at these intensities, but they don't factor in what that's doing to our autonomic nervous system. So if you're running easy all the time, it's a very easy session to recover from. So then you start building this big base of easy stuff. So when your key sessions come up, you built a good aerobic base to recover in between bouts, so say intervals.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing, high low for lack of a better term, that in between rest day when you're doing your easy aerobic is allowing you to recover for that next high intensity day. It gives you, great sleep. So if you're going all this easy stuff, you're building volume, sleep quality goes up. sleep quality goes up, quality sessions go up. So, there's a lot of, I mean, if you're looking at the aerobic as a center of, say, a bike hub, all this stuff is going outside of it, giving you and building these batteries to just allow you to perform at a higher level.
Gotcha. Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the high-low approach, just training in general to maximize outputs on those high days and be able to recover on those lower days too. But I guess one of the questions surrounding, I guess, low intensity training within intermittent sports as well, or in sports that
Mhm.
typically have a lot of, I guess, technical training. Uh, this might be, I guess, a loaded question, or a harder one to answer, but at what point is the sports training enough? Because a lot of sports technical training is it will be counted as a low intensity stimulus, depending on what it is. Is there a way
Mhm.
someone could be like, okay, do I need to add more on top of that, or do I need to start touching on intensities maybe they're not getting within their sports training? It might be a bit of a hard one to answer because it's a bit more general and kind of situational.
Yeah, so I think people get the wrong impression about, and I don't know why, I become the aerobic guy and, on the internet. That's, that's whatever. But the aerobic, holds that base, it builds that base. And then, how you sprinkle in, that higher intensity work, um, to negate it is totally wrong. To go to the extreme of, say, 80% high intensity, 20% low intensity, I mean, is that, a good way to do it too? So, um, I'll give you an example. So I have, and again, this isn't really an intermittent sport, but I have a special operations person I'm working with right now. And, we do like last week, he got 13 hours of training, like 12 hours of that was like low intensity. But then we have like 30 minutes of like threshold work. And then we have like another 20 minutes total throughout the week of very high intensity work.
Mm,
Um, and for him, and then I can see on his heart rate HRV for training that he keeps adapting to the stimulus.
hmm
And so, and he's getting stronger. Like he did a, 485, deadlift the other day.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not that you negate it. You just have to understand the mixture. And some people are not chefs, right? They want to go by the recipe. They want a cookie cutter approach. But you may only be able to handle one high intensity session a week.
Gotcha.
I may be handle two. I may need, 4 days in between those two, but through the training process, you want to build yourself up to handle more of that, high intensity work. That's why I think some people just go way too hard. They just can't recover. They think they're out of shape. They go harder. They're even going, so then it just becomes a spiral. And then you get the wrong adaptation. You're overtrained and you, perform like shit. So,
Before getting back to the podcast, I want to let you know there's a link down in the description for the Swedes Arts of Fighting underground community. You can get all the help you need for your combat sports training. You get every single Swedes Arts of Fighting training program, online course, and you get access to a range of coaches within the private Discord community. So go check that out. And back to the podcast. Yeah, I think a lot of combat athletes end up in a space where every session is trying to go as hard as possible. So even if they are doing some technical stuff, at the end of the session, they might do hard rolls, hard sparring, that kind of thing, and go as hard as possible. So every session kind of looks the same, and they're getting the same stimulus over and over again, and it becomes harder to recover from.
yeah. And then it becomes, the training monotony.
Mm,
Uh, you know, there's, there's so much that we don't know about human performance. And so, trying to get people out of these ruts, understanding from a physiological standpoint, from a very easy tool to manage heart rate variability. Okay, are we in a rut? Do we need to get out of it? So it's this constant stimulus assess, you reassess, new training plan, stimulus. So it's just this constant circle of adapting, to, how, because then a lot of these people have other jobs too, right?
Yep.
I mean, you probably do have pro fighters that you talk to and work with, but that's separate. But the majority of people have a full-time job as well.
Yeah.
So you start stacking that stuff on, and if they have kids and lack of sleep, and so,
Mm. No, for sure. That, and the other thing is regarding, I guess, easy field tests for people to use. Do you have anything that you like to use for people to be able to assess themselves, um, you know, assess essentially their conditioning without having to go to a lab and do a bunch of stuff like that?
yeah. So I mean, there's a couple good tests. I think the 30-15, which is a submaximal running test,
Mm.
which was designed by Martin Boucher out of I think he's in France now.
PSG.
You know, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, you could do, a Cooper test. Here for football, has the tribe test.
Yeah.
Um, so, you could run a mile full out or, a 3 mile. Are there specific testing within the fighting realm that are kind of standardized across the board that they look at, that you could apply as well? So, and then also, like, how do you respond in training? Like, you do a hard interval. Okay, is it taking you 3 minutes, 4 minutes? Is it a 1 minute recovery? Can you even get your heart rate up there? Maybe you're so overtrained right now that, even trying to get to, a high heart rate is extremely difficult. So understanding then how to back it down.
Yeah.
But they need to be repeatable and they need to be standardized enough to where if you were in another country and you had to do a test, you could go out and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's easy things I guess you can be on a bike or a rower, do a simple maximal aerobic speed test, like you
Yeah,
mentioned there, with a
yeah,
mile or 5, 6 minutes, and at least just having something like that can give you even just a general baseline, just to
right. And I think that people get stuck on the testing is, okay, what am I going to do with it now?
yeah,
Especially if you're self-coached. So, I think the hardest thing for athletes that are self-coached is they always think they need to do more.
mm,
And so can they get into a mindset through these testing? I mean, and you can do daily readiness tests too, also from like a neuromuscular standpoint, like a broad jump or a vertical jump.
mm,
Okay, especially when I looked at Omega Wave and then when I had it in the training facility, like the neuromuscular system like took the longest for even our top athletes to recover from. So, we were using a different battery of tests, each day to determine, loading intensity so, we can back it down. And with the self-trained athlete, having these simple tests that you can do, but then understanding what they mean to you in that context and then how to adjust your training accordingly.
yeah.
So you
Did you
and
find I was gonna say, did you find like your more maybe explosive style athletes took longer to recover versus maybe the more workhorse kind of work capacity style athletes?
yeah, and yes, and then later on, once they got like a higher, aerobic base, they were able to have higher outputs more often.
Mm,
So, their continuity of training was much better. And so, that's the other thing. Like, okay, if you can only establish one high intensity session, okay, how can we get, some more quality in there? And so the trick with some of these guys was you just need more easy work.
mm, okay. And then we talked about how a lot of athletes or fighters, might be working full time, families, training on top of that. Some people might not have the time to dedicate to volume to be able to go out and do extra, I guess, easy sessions because, a lot of technical sessions, they maybe have to fit in some other things. Is there a way someone can almost microdose these these lower intensity sessions, or
Sure.
I don't know, find other ways to get them in?
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's a great question. I think walking and just moving, like, trying to accumulate as many steps throughout the day as possible.
Okay.
Um, even going for like a 5 or 10 minute run every day at such a low intensity that you don't even break a sweat. So then if you do then begin to train again, and then running is one of the modalities, like your musculoskeletal system has been doing this, so you're, somewhat ready. And I think walking, accumulating volume, because it's easy, get up, moving from your desk, just as much moving as you can do. That's, and you have 16 hours to try to get, as much easy work as you can get in. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. And then regarding the time for, say, your low intensity sessions, you mentioned obviously you can do maybe 5 to 10 minutes every day, but is there like a minimum, I guess, threshold that someone should hit doing their low intensity work for adaptations to start happening? Because you could do 5 to 10 minutes every day over the week. There might be 70 minutes total, but at some
Mhm.
point you've got to increase that volume. So
Right.
is there a threshold that you'd like someone to hit?
Oh man. I mean,
Yeah, it's a very general question because it's
no, no,
obviously
no.
situation dependent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. It's actually a good question because this is kind of real world stuff here. Is there a minimum dose, Scott? I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a study saying, you what, 150 minutes is what they advocate for kids, I think, a week. Um, that's 2 hours and what, 30 minutes. If you're a fighter, can you get that minimum dose throughout the week? That's a great place to start.
Plus
Um,
the technical training on top of it, I guess would top it up if you're training multiple
yeah,
times a week. Yeah.
yeah. As long as at certain times that stuff is, relatively low intensity. Um, and, I think people would be very surprised even on some of that technical work, like, how really low intensity is it for some, athletes. Um,
Yeah.
so that's why the technical skills suffer because fatigue is so high because of the lack of a base. And so these athletes can't get, don't see the improvements that they want to.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. And maybe just coming back to I guess the adaptations, physiological adaptations within
mhm,
the stuff. So
mhm.
a lot of the idea around the low intensity work is okay. We're getting eccentric hypertrophy of that left ventricle. Do you want to maybe dive into a little bit of some of that? I guess the high intensity versus low intensity regarding some of these heart adaptations and what we're really trying to achieve there.
Yeah. So, on the low intensity work, for the, hypertrophy of the left ventricle, that's, the intensities need to be low enough to where, that chamber gets filled up with, high volumes. So that's why the lower the intensity, the better, because the volume of blood that goes in there, it stretches it. And I mean, I have guys now that we were running on heart rate based, 2 or 3 years ago. We switched to Moxie, and their low intensity work went from, say, like 110 to 115 beats per minute to now they're like 85 to 95 beats per
Wow.
minute. Um, and so, that's why that low intensity, that zone zero, the walking and all that stuff is going to give you, that easy work to get that stretching
Mhm.
concept there. On the flip side, the high intensity work is going to make it stronger, obviously. I mean, the heart is a muscle. So, you need some of that, max work to, develop the strength of it. And that's why most sports require a balance. So you need the low intensity work on top of the high intensity work. Um,
Hmm.
And then from there, then you start working on, the muscular adaptations of the oxidative capacity. Um, and then also with the bigger chamber size, lower intensities, again, it's going to affect that parasympathetic nervous system just to give you so many benefits on, sleep, relaxation, recovery, better digestion of food, and so on. And if you're in that middle zone too often, so you're going too hard to develop the cardiac system, but too easy, to get the right adaptation of the heart with the hard work, that's what exhausts you. And then you become more sympathetic dominant, and then you just you're forced to rest because you can't reach what you need to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big issue in most sports. People sitting in that middle intensity, they spend their technical training in that low middle intensity. Then when they go to do the extra conditioning, they may be doing like hard circuits for 15, 30 minutes or whatever, and they just stay in that exact same zone over and over. And they never hit that low, they never hit that really hard work. And they, as you mentioned, yeah, they just get stuck in that middle doing the same thing, exhausting themselves.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, in sports, if you're looking at, I mean, just watching, MMA and different grappling sports, like, there are these, extreme bursts of activity, right? It's very explosive. Um, but then, you'll, be down on the ground, and then it becomes, very technical. So the bigger base you have, the better you can recover from those harder bouts. You're just going to give yourself a better advantage to display your technical skill at the highest level.
Mm, no, for sure. It's interesting as well. I mean, I guess it depends how we look at the aerobic base or aerobic energy system. But if you're looking at the classic VO2 max, we know I guess within marathon performance, running economy is the thing that kind of relates well to marathon performance, where VO2 max doesn't seem to relate so well to marathon performance, at least among populations with similar times there. But I guess even with in combat sports, or even any intermittent sport, really, how much emphasis do you place on specifically trying to develop, say, that number, that VO2 max number? Is that something you're looking to build through specific training? Are you trying to spend a lot of time at VO2 max within the conditioning?
No, no, because if you look at intermittent sports, let's say like American football or soccer,
Mm,
rugby, basketball. So, American football, it's very, alactic, less than 5 seconds. It's all about speed and anaerobic threshold. So it's really, driving up that ceiling of how often can you repeat that speed without the drop off of fatigue. And so it's either aerobic or, anaerobic alactic. So
mhm.
the development of that is totally different, and you don't need to improve the VO2 max. My thing is, how can we improve the recovery between those bouts?
Hmm.
But then that becomes it's cardiac driven, it's parasympathetic, it's oxidative capacity of both slow and fast twitch fiber.
Hmm.
Um, and then you go to, say, a basketball player, so they need a combination of everything. So anaerobic lactate, aerobic. So development for them, like, getting their heart rates, to a higher rate for longer periods of time as they get closer to the season is a good thing to do. But you need to have that base of that aerobic work for them to be able to do that session and recover to where they can come back a day or two later and repeat it. And this is why looking at the hormonal system, the endocrine system to develop that through specific training. So man, you're just this huge biological engine that can withstand super high intensity. It's going to be painful. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But okay, I can recover in 30 seconds where it takes you a minute and a half.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so that's why, training for each sport is just so totally different, based on the profile.
Yeah, gotcha. And you mentioned obviously the oxidative potential of the muscle. Is there any specific type of conditioning you're doing to elicit those adaptations? Is low intensity training, is that going to give someone some of that benefit there, or is it exclusively a high intensity training adaptation that you're pulling for that?
No. So like on the oxidative capacity of the slow fiber, we'll do like a tempo squat, oxidative squat, where
Hmm.
you're 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up, and you're never relaxing the muscle. So there's that constant tension that's there. So that's what we use for both the upper and the lower body. Um,
Yep.
and with a lot of our offensive linemen for football, like a lot of different pressing movements, because there's so much punching involved at that position that the higher oxidative capacity of that upper body, just the longer they're going to be able to sustain their skill.
Hmm.
So like when I was training Navy SEALs for buds, we would do a lot of that. Plus, we did a lot of upper body roller skiing, pressing up above, ISO holds. So when you look at the demands of what they need to go through, okay, and then how can you, and it's not a specific, sport specific, it's more of a general specific adaptation that you're trying to achieve. Oxidative capacity for fast twitch is like totally different. Like it's 100% effort, short bouts, so hill sprints, different types of push-ups, box jumps, things of that nature. But you can't go above anaerobic threshold, or it's not aerobic in nature. And then for the super high intensity, high threshold movements, then you go to 80 to 90% of your max, say on the squat, for 7 to 10 sets to total failure.
Ooh,
And
brutal.
yeah, yeah, but there's certain markers that I look for physiologically that if you don't have them in place, the the training benefit won't be there for you. You just won't be able to recover from it.
Yeah. Wait, explain that squat one for me. So what was it? It was 80 to 90 something percent for 7 to 10
Yeah,
sets to failure.
yeah, 7 to 10 sets
Mm.
to failure.
So you'd be ripping out like anywhere from 3 to 5, or maybe even 7 reps, kind of thing. Did you know you can represent Sweet Arts of Fighting while you're training? We're more than just a membership. We also have rash guards and shorts. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that we have the Sweet Arts of Fighting 2.0 shorts, and we also have the Sweet Science of Fighting short and long sleeve rash guard. There is another design coming soon, but you can get those on xmarshall.com, and you can go down in the description and you can find that. And back to the podcast.
Yeah, we a friend of mine had one of his athletes do it. This is several years ago. On the first set, he got, this is at 315. I think he got 23 reps.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Um, and then, and I forget how it went from there, but I think at the end of it, he was crying. Um, I think it took him like 2 weeks to recover, but again, man, there's a lot of different ways to give yourself a good hormonal spike without it. The lift itself isn't the issue; it's how and when you apply it. So there's a lot of different ways to apply that type of work. So
Okay, it's interesting because yeah, I've never heard of that. I guess doing it that way, which is really interesting. But so, what is it you're trying to get out of that exactly? Was that for the oxidative capacity of the fast twitch fibers? That one?
so
Or was that
that's purely for the glycolytic fibers, and then also for the because the stress response is so huge, is so big
yeah.
that the endocrine system. So building that up, and you run that for probably 2 to 3 weeks, and then unload for a week, and then maybe
Mm.
2 or 3 more weeks of that, and then get out of it and allow those systems to recover.
Yeah.
So and I think maybe I've had, I don't know, 10 or 11 athletes kind of get to that point where they were able to do that.
But it takes a big training base before you throw that on someone.
Yeah. And mentally, are you going to be okay with it?
Yeah, I can imagine that. The anxiety coming into training, having to do something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I guess along the lines of intermittent sports. So obviously we've talked a lot of team sports, intermittent sports, obviously combat sports. I like to think of it as basically rugby with other parts, other parts of
Right,
training there.
right.
Um, they're very similar. So the idea around repeated sprint ability. So we know, some kind of aerobic base will help you recover between sprints, which is good. But you need to have the
Mhm.
power output to be able to sprint fast or have those explosive efforts. But then we also have repeated high intensity efforts that might not be running based. And there's a good little paper that showing that when you add, for example, with rugby players, when you add some kind of tackle or grappling element to the drill, the aerobic, I guess, fitness doesn't correlate as well as when it's just pure sprinting, which I thought was quite interesting. But I guess the question is there some kind of difference when it's not a purely running based or purely sprint based sport? Is there some kind of difference, I guess, within your programming or conditioning philosophy and modalities that would change within that? I don't know. It's a very general question. I don't know if I framed it well, but hopefully you get what I mean there.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so, I've had the moxie on some of my athletes, football players, but that are also doing grappling within our training.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and it's quite, so let me back up here. Do a lot of grabbing, and so the moxie I had it on the right the right quad. So it's not on the dominant like grappling muscles. But even then you can see quite a marked physiological response even with that, even with a non-involved muscle.
Mm,
And I don't know, is it because they're young kids, but they're not elite level. So it's just that, you know, lack of training causing those huge, deficits in oxygen. Um, so what I would do then, based off of that, and even if I didn't have a moxie, is how long do those grappling maneuvers typically last?
hmm
And maybe you could answer that. Is it
Yeah, it's usually like, well, within the very scarce research out, it's like a 6-to-1 work to rest ratio. I can actually pull it up. Let's see, but it's like 117 seconds or something of work around there. If that makes
okay? So
that
like
helps at all.
so like 2.5 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, we could even just say 2 minutes just to make it easy.
Okay, cool. Um, so then, I mean, that's a totally different energy requirement, right? Like there's a little bit of aerobic there, but mostly it's kind of in that lactic power capacity. And I'll actually send you a chart that I have on training those different energy systems.
Oh, sure.
So then you get into, okay, if you're doing that type of training and that's how long those bouts last, okay, now you need to look at, is my rest, so you said it's like a 6-to-1 work to rest ratio.
Yeah, for jiu-jitsu, based on basically the only real paper that that's been
Yeah,
done on it.
yeah.
So good to know.
So,
Yeah.
so then, how, like, are you practicing that way? So, are you getting on the ground and grappling for 2.5 minutes, then taking a rest based off of that 6-to-1 ratio, and then doing it again?
hmm
And then when does your performance, and again, it would have to be subjective, right? So subjectively, when does your performance begin to drop?
Yeah.
And then should you rest, say, 5 to 10 minutes, easy spinning, maybe some very easy technical shadow stuff like that, and then come back and do some more bouts of that.
Hmm.
So the quality is like, extremely high. And then as you get closer to your mat, your mat, then you begin to cut the rest down even, so then it becomes more specific, more sport specific, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So you have to have some type of base within that output range to begin to get used to it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well because obviously, a lot of the research they give these numbers, but this is like the average that they might
Right.
see within that specific thing. So obviously, you've got, a range outside of that. So instead of how do you then how would you develop something that doesn't just stick to the averages? Because you probably want people to okay, you're gonna have periods where you might have to go longer. You're gonna have periods where you might have to go shorter but more intense. So instead of just being like, okay, I'm gonna do, for example, boxing. Let's just say three 3 minute rounds and
Mm-hmm.
someone's okay, they're going to do 3 minute rounds in training because they have 3 minute rounds in a fight. But at some point, you're going to have to potentially break that down some way because you're going to need more intense periods within that, or maybe extend those periods depending. Is there is there a certain? Well, I mean, it's again really general
Yeah.
question, but is there some kind of framework someone could use?
So, so okay, let's say you're going 3 by 3 minute rounds. Um, so let's say at the beginning, you're just doing those rounds kind of based off of, normal intensity. So you build a base of 3 by 3 minutes basically. And
Hmm.
do you do that for 2 weeks, 4 weeks? I don't know. I would, let's say I'm doing that twice a week. Okay, how is James recovering through heart rate variability, through the, subjective questionnaires, and then just your overall feeling of training? So
Yep.
then, you kind of build that base throughout, let's say 4 weeks. And the adaptations are good, you're recovering. Okay, now we go to, okay, man, we're going to start with 30 seconds. We're going to go 3 by 30 second rounds. And that 30 seconds is super high intensity
Hmm.
with, say, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio of rest.
Hmm.
So, so those 3 by 30 seconds are very high quality.
Hmm.
And that would be the first session. And then, okay, how do you look the next day on a recovery standpoint? Because it's always easier to start at the lowest common denominator and then work forward slowly
Yeah.
versus, okay, now we're going to go 3 by 3 minute, just high intensity rounds, and you're, crushed for
Yeah.
a week or two. Um, and then, the fee, and giving training prescriptions for me is hard just because I'm asking so many questions. But then,
Yeah.
like getting feedback from you, like, okay, what did you think of that? Have you ever done that before? Um, what are the hard parts for you during a round? Is it the first say 15 seconds of high intensity, you're gas, but then as you start warming up, you're better. So there's a prescription, but then there's always this, subjective info coming back from, the athlete. And if you're training somebody in person, then you can see their body language through these 30-second bouts. Like, hey, man, he's ball buster here in the first 30, second 30, man, he's great. Oh, shit, 30s, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so then maybe the next session you just go 2 of those 30-second bouts.
Mm. Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's all good. It's just I guess people in the audience, a lot of them, might doing their own training, just to give them some ideas around how they can look to implement and structure this kind of themselves. That's
Mhm.
kind of the framework I'm trying to get these questions out just for that just
Yeah,
for the
no.
audience there. So yeah, it's no, it's good. It's good because I think a lot of people get caught, okay, it's 3 3 minute rounds. I think it was interesting you said that. Okay, we're just going to do 3 30 second rounds. Whereas a lot of people might be like, okay, I'm going to do 6 30 second rounds to make it 3 minutes and then times that by three. and end up doing 18 30-second rounds the first time and then cook themselves, you know? Like I'm sure a lot of people will do that because I want to make sure I hit that same time versus scaling it right back when you start the intensity to then build from there.
Right, right. And that's where all the other outside stuff comes into play. So, maybe I had a 3 by 30 scheduled for you. You train at the end of the day. You've had a hard day at work. I mean, so you come into that session and you're just totally gassed, but hey, I'm going to do it anyway. Um, and so, like, I think the more people can learn to stand down sometimes, as opposed to giving themselves more harder all the time, I think, and everybody, I just think they'd be better off.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I've got, I think, one last question for you for this, and it's around. I guess we can talk about competing adaptations. So typically, I think it's more prevalent within conditioning generally, where people almost split the low intensity and the high intensity into, I guess, separate training cycles or separate blocks. Because as we mentioned before, we talk about the high intensity. Okay, you're going to get these heart adaptations. The low intensity, you're going to get these heart adaptations. They kind of, I guess, interfere with each other. So how does that play any role within how you plan your conditioning as a training week or even a training day? Does that not matter if it's a low intensity day or if it's a certain day you might have some high intensity and low intensity within that day because that's just what you need to do, or are you trying to split these as far apart as much as possible?
No, so all those qualities are in the training week all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, how am I kind of managing the percentages, so like with, somebody would say it's a high intensity day, after the warm up, I may have them do like, some threshold work, say 3 or 4 reps of like 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then they would, cool down, come in and do a weight session. And they could do it right after, or they could do it in the evening where we're going to do like heavy deadlift or heavy squat, low reps, but high intensity. And then, at the end of that session, I may have oxidative work. So I'm encompassing, these three things on one day. And then the next day is always a recovery, or even after the session, the recovery begins. So, the next day could be super low intensity of a walk or a hike.
Yeah.
Um, Wednesday, okay, how are you feeling? Neuromuscular, I'm pretty good. Cardiac's good. Okay, then we're going to do a different high intensity session with, 10-second sprints, say 6 of them with like a 4 minute rest in between each. And then we're going to do some elastic work on, say, some plyometrics or something. And then Thursday again with another low intensity day. And then
Mm-hmm.
Friday is more of a stimulative session from Monday's work. So say it's half the volume of that Monday session.
Gotcha.
And I may have some hill sprints in there or something else at the beginning, but starting off with some, high intensity aerobic conditioning work. Um,
Nice.
and then they all get the weekend off. So it's something I went to probably a year and a half ago after listening to Niels van der Poel, who's a world champion or Olympic and world record holder in the 5 and 10K speed skating. So then people have, normal lives and, it kind of stays in a flow. And then they know that, hey man, Monday's coming and I can, really get after it. So,
Mm.
uh, and then, yeah, and that's how they do adjust and keep going.
Nice. I do have one more question for you actually, and it's around the idea of high intensity. You can still make aerobic adaptations through high intensity or even sprint interval training. So I just want to hear, I guess, your side and your argument for, you know, why shouldn't someone just do, say, high intensity training to improve? I mean, if you do the same thing, it caps out pretty quickly in terms of aerobic adaptations when you're doing your sprint interval stuff. But I guess your take on why someone couldn't just do their high intensity training through the week, their maybe 2 or 3 sessions, and then just not worry about specific low intensity conditioning when they're still getting some aerobic adaptations from the higher intensity stuff?
Sure. So number one is most of the athlete or these athletes that we're talking about are you know other people that have jobs and are not full-time athletes, so their base is probably low, and so you're doing the tip of the spear work, tip of the pyramid work, and that's all you have. So, and I've seen it with triathletes, with grapplers, MMA, like they do all this high intensity work and they are having a hard time recovering. They are injured. They are, kind of really sluggish within training because they just do high intensity work all the time. So there's not a chance to, build those cardiac adaptations, mitochondria density at the muscle. And then it becomes very exhausting on top of their, the rest of their, life. Uh, and so I just think the risk reward is, I don't know why you're doing 20 to 40 minutes a week of mixed high intensity work with the intermittent work is a bad thing. And I just think people, like, if I'm not working you hard, I'm not working hard, the perception is I'm not getting a good workout.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm constantly educating our athletes and our parents and young kids and young coaches on, be very cautious on how you address cardiac adaptations, because if you're going too hard too soon, that's going to be a limiting factor as the athlete gets older.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect answer there for the audience to mull over as well. But I think that's pretty much all the questions I have for you, Mark. If people want to find you and follow you and see what you're up to, where can they do that?
Uh, that's a, that's a great question, James.
I'll throw it in the description too when I get this up in a couple of weeks. So
I think my Instagram is Mark PTC, and my Twitter is results_period.
Perfect. And we'll get those all linked up as well so people can find you. But thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, man. Thanks again.